The Shin Megami Tensei is my favorite franchise of all time. Every single video game in that series has a compelling narrative, if not a little misguided at times. The Persona series is no different. In fact, Persona 3 is one of those games that helped define me as a person. No, I'm not joking. If you haven't played it yourself, you should. They even made a very good remake. You have no excuse. However, I would say Shin Megami Tensei's biggest problem has been the writing of its villains. They usually come off as very one-dimensional, which is primarily because they need to fully represent the themes of the game. This problem is more pronounced in Persona, as that series is carried a lot harder by characters' interactions and development. And I would argue Persona has more misses than hits, though when it hits, it tends to be a home run. And this leads to Persona 5. Persona 5's story is very good, and it resonates a lot, especially if you play the Royal Edition, where there are key improvements to the story. But there's still that villain problem. In the game, two villains stood out as the best. One is someone we'll not talk about for this video, but the other is Kamoshida, the very first villain, and defines the tone of the game going forward. He sets a very high bar that many villains cannot reach. So when Persona 5 P5X comes out, and it's established itself as an alternate universe of Persona 5, this naturally meant this story needed its own Kamoshida. Bluntly speaking, this did not work out. It's not even close. In fact, it's so bad that the writer of this villain got fired. So let's stop beating around the bush and dive into how P5X dropped the ball with this introduction. Before I actually introduce the villain, we first need to start with a bird's eye perspective, because there is a major difference in this world compared to the original Persona 5. In this world, you play as Wonder, and before you can even get into action, he is greatly held back by his lack of desire. This is because the world as a whole has a literal depletion of desire. It's hard for people to have a want for anything. They just go through the motions of life and accept whatever is given to them, good or bad. But to show how extreme this is, there is a scene where a girl literally jumps off a building to end herself, and the only one who has a reaction is Wonder. No one else even cares, and one even says he wished he caught it on camera. This is hugely important to keep in mind going forward, and we'll be circling around back to this at the end. So now we can get into the introduction of the villain. Within the subway station, there's a random guy who suddenly looks like he got possessed. And after looking around, he spots a woman with some fine ass legs. And he starts creeping on her. At this point, I'm thinking, oh, are we about to explore sexual assault in the subway? That lines up pretty well with Kamoshida. So I'm locked in. And then this happens. This guy just aggressively slams himself into women. Yes, specifically women. The dudes are safe. I was utterly confused. I didn't even know what I was watching during the time. Did the game have to go full PG for this to work? Well, turns out, no. Thanks to a couple of conversations I had, I learned this was a real thing. This is called Butsukari Otoko. Translated, it means bumpy man. As the name suggests, this phenomenon is when people, typically men, deliberately harass people, primarily women, by bumping right into them. And there's more violent variations of this too, as some guys just outright punches their victims at random. And thanks to how Japan works, where people just want to move on with their life and just get to work, a lot of this stuff goes unreported, which only makes it more difficult for the police to stop this, because there isn't enough proof to deem this as a deliberate assault. So this brings up a fairly obvious question. Why is this a thing? Well, this largely goes into the villain's backstory, which will lead into some uncomfortable talking points. So let's save that for later. For now, let's get back into the writing. So our villain's real name is Takayuki Kiyuchi. He's a textbook salaryman for a company, except now he's a menace to society. No, really, there's a website that keeps track of people, criminal or otherwise, and deems them a menace. And he has been coined as the Subway Slammer. And just like in real life, thanks to the lack of opposition, the guy keeps getting away with it. The police doesn't have enough proof to say he is intentionally attacking people. And now I'm going to spend the next few minutes showing you why this immediately falls apart. The whole point of this is that it has to look like an accident. Let's say the first incident we saw is passable, since it's in a crowded area. But look at this. There's no one around, there's no crowd, he's out in the open, and he straight up gestures a threat to a random girl. Yeah, no one would call this an accident, but one could argue this was ultimately harmless. Well, alright. Next example. Here, he is creeping up on Motoha. Before he gets close to her, he shoves a guy to the ground, and I think he actually passed the fuck out because he does not get up. Then Motoha spots Kiyuchi, and the man just locks in and he sprints. But Motoha's BFF, Tomoko, shoves her out of the way and she takes the hit. She gets rammed so hard, that he sends her flying, and she gets thrown onto the train tracks. People freak out, and somehow this man slips away. He even stares at Wonder and says, "Hey man, that was an accident." Motherfucker, who are you fooling? This would be like you decided to dance naked on the street and say, "It was an accident, I just forgot my clothes." No one's buying that hot mess. Oh, but I got one more example. So this one doesn't actually happen. This is Wonder having a vision of something that could happen if he doesn't act. Or at least that's what I think this is. The game doesn't explain it at this point in time. Anyway, Kiyuchi sees his next target, a mother minding her own business with her baby. And she just so happens to be next to a flight of stairs. So I'm thinking, no, this is not about to happen. But it did. He shoulder ramps her, and both the mother and the baby go flying down the stairs. And later on, I think the vision confirms that they both died from that. I had to tell you, this was such a crazy high escalation that I laughed for a good 5 minutes. And let it be known, even if this actually was an accident, which it is not, he would still be going to jail. But again, this was just a vision. So all we really have on him is what happened to Motoha and her best friend. Motoha reported this to the police. The police states there is no proof, but Motoha rightfully stays to check the cameras. It happened literally at the train tracks, so it would definitely be caught on tape. But the police just says, "Nah, we had to catch him in the act." This scene made me crash out. I wish I was actually streaming this during the time, but I actually had to stop the cutscene and go on a mental journey to try to figure out how something so convolutedly stupid was conjured up. The policeman says they had to catch Kiyuchi in the act. Well, you would catch him in the act if you actually watched it on camera. He tackled Tomoko so hard the NFL would be blowing up his phone trying to get him on their team. And this is slightly off topic, but Motoha and Wonder confronts Kiyuchi, and he pretty much just straight up says, "Yeah, I did it. What are you brats gonna do about it? No one cares. The whole subway is mine for slamming." And then this guy just disappears from plain sight. No, seriously, look. Even Batman couldn't do that. When the fuck did he learn how to teleport? So I think you get the point. The handling of this situation is unrealistic at best and a travesty at worst. But what about the backstory? Well, I'm glad to say this is a bit more digestible. When he was younger, Kiyuchi was an up-and-coming pro baseball pitcher. A lot of eyes were on him, and during an event when he was teaching kids baseball, his game-ending pitch was hit by a then grade schooler, Matoha, and it was a home run. Since this was televised, this came off as extremely embarrassing for Kyuchi. Since then, his morale just broke. He became known as the pro player who was beat by a little girl, and his performance took a massive hit. He just never recovered. He started drinking obsessively and missing practice, and he spent his money on women to satisfy himself. This eventually got leaked to the press, and the baseball league was forced to suspend him indefinitely. In order to save Kyuchi's future, they spun a response story, stating Kyuchi's poor performance is due to him hiding an injury while teaching the kids. While this injury never happened, this made Kyuchi become irrational towards Matoha, blaming her for making him fail. He also ended up blaming the women he paid to smash for leaking the story. So this is how he became a salaryman, and there's plenty to say about this. While the twisted connection between Matoha and Kyuchi feels contrived, it's serviceable. It's not what I would come up with. It mostly feels like an excuse to quickly get Matoha involved, even though they really didn't need to do that. They kind of established their reason already just by him attacking her. But the main point is delivered. Kyuchi was so broken after getting embarrassed that he couldn't live up to his potential. The dialogue itself even gave him the answer to his problems. If you don't want to be known as a failure, then work hard and prove everyone wrong. Kyuchi did not rise to that challenge, and he chose to blame everyone else instead. Since he has held onto his anger for so long, that's what caused him to start lashing out at random people. When you finally defeat Kyuchi's shadow, he states he had nothing else to live for. There was no dream he could hold on to. And this is where we get into that uncomfortable part of this conversation. If there's anything the game gets right about Kyuchi, it's why he started attacking people at random. It was his only way to feel like he has some sort of power. And this is actually a reason that is often stated from aggressors in real life. Japan is one of the most overworked countries in the world. On top of that, the society is built to work as a collective. So if anyone steps out of line or even just stands out, they're often seen as a disgrace and shamed. So people get jobs that they hate, and they force themselves to be what others want them to be. This is the primary reason why Butsukari exists. That feeling of controlling others through just being stronger than them is a sense of catharsis. It's just unfortunate that this experience is so utterly destroyed by everything that leads up to this moment. The writers tried so hard to make another version of Kamoshida, and while the idea was good enough, the execution was so shitty. While Kamoshida felt like a real villain, Kyuchi felt like a cartoon villain. Even his boss fight has him using women as fodder, much like how Kamoshida did. But it comes off as significantly more tacked on by comparison. Even before the boss fight, Kyuchi was all like, "Fuck women!" and acting all super red-pilled. And maybe that's the point, but the point has no substance. Which leads to me thinking this. The story would have been a lot better if Matoha was not the cause of Kyuchi's shattered ego. Just keep her as a child who was inspired by her childhood hero and nothing more. Instead, things would line up a lot better if his slump was caused by a strained relationship. If Kyuchi just had a girlfriend who only got with him because he was a rising baseball star, and not because she actually loved him. He could even be a total simp and try to please her as much as possible. But he would soon realize she doesn't love him for him, and only wanted to be married to a man who would eventually become rich. The stress of that would put him in a slump, and she would eventually dump him, and then he would spend his money on other women, and the rest is history. I think just that would be enough to make him a lot more sympathetic, while also correctly representing Butsukari. It wouldn't change how idiotic things happen in the real world though, and that leads into the issue of this lost desire concept that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So the idea of lost desire is also a reference in real life. I'm not going to act like I'm an expert or anything like that, but there's a book from Kenichi Amae called How to Ignite the Low Desire Society, where he describes that Japan has a uniquely low desire, unwilling to take any risk, and to just go through the motions in life. It's the only first world country in the world that does not have a strong consumer mentality, which is a major problem for the Japanese government because it means stimulating the economy is extremely difficult. There's a lot of factors as to why this happened, but for the sake of staying focused on the topic of this video, we'll leave it as just that. Long story short, I get the feeling that P5X may have misinterpreted what low desire society means in this case. With how Persona tries its best to make social commentary, with a heavy emphasis on Japanese, this can be dangerously seen as Japanese society having strong apathy towards suicide. And in Koichi's case, the apathy towards assault is also excused by this lost desire. Like everything in life, this situation is nuanced, and boiling things down to this is not only dangerous, but is also poor quality coming from the Shin Megami Tensei series. Point being, this whole scenario with Koichi is flawed from the very start. Which sucks, to be honest. This is actually a very interesting concept as a whole, but they just didn't get it right this go around. Now, from what I played, the second villain is written a lot better, but I haven't picked up the game in a while due to a lack of interest. If people want to see if the story improves, be sure to like the video. If it gets enough, I'll head back in and research the next villain. For now, I'll see you next time.